The cemetery was silent, the only sound the crunch of dirt under his boots. His grandfather's tombstone loomed before him, the name etched in stone barely visible under layers of moss and time. He had never imagined he would be here, digging up his grandfather's grave. But the letter he found a week ago had left him no choice. The letter was short but cryptic. David, if you're reading this, I've left something for you. But to find it, you must dig where I rest. Trust me, it's worth it. His grandfather had always been a man of mystery, a man who spoke in riddles and lived by his own rules. David had no idea what to expect, but he couldn't ignore the plea in those words. The shovel hit something hard, and David froze. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the dirt with his hands. Beneath the soil, he uncovered not a coffin, but a large flat stone. His heart raced as he pushed the stone aside, revealing a dark, gaping hole, a secret door. David hesitated. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. Trust me. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the rusted handle and pulled the door open. A rush of cold air hit him, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. He shone his flashlight into the darkness and gasped. The beam of light revealed a narrow staircase leading down into the earth. The walls were lined with strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. David's hands shook as he descended, each step echoing in the silence. At the bottom, he found himself in a small chamber. The room was filled with stacks of old books, dusty artifacts, and in the center, a large wooden chest. David's heart pounded as he approached the chest. He lifted the heavy lid and his breath caught in his throat. Inside were piles of gold coins, glittering jewels, and stacks of cash. But what caught his attention was the note resting on top of the treasure. It was written in his grandfather's handwriting. David, this wealth is not for you alone. Use it to change lives. Be the man I know you can be. David stared at the note, his mind racing. What did his grandfather mean? Why had he left this treasure hidden? And why had he chosen David to find it? The questions swirled in his head as he stood there, surrounded by riches he couldn't comprehend. But one thing was clear, his life was about to change forever. David sat on the cold stone floor of the chamber. The chest of treasure opened before him. The gold coins glinted in the beam of his flashlight, but his eyes kept drifting back to the note. Use it to change lives. The words felt heavy, like a responsibility he wasn't sure he could carry. He thought about his life up until now. He had always been ordinary, a man who worked a modest job, paid his bills, and kept to himself. He had never dreamed of wealth, let alone the kind of wealth that could change lives. But here it was, right in front of him, and his grandfather's voice seemed to echo in the chamber. Be the man I know you can be. David's hands trembled as he picked up a handful of coins. They felt cold and foreign in his grip. He thought about keeping it all for himself. He could buy a new house, a car, maybe even quit his job and live comfortably for the rest of his life. But the thought made him uneasy. His grandfather hadn't hidden this treasure for personal gain. He had hidden it for a purpose David was only beginning to understand. He opened one of the old books stacked in the chamber. The pages were brittle, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. His grandfather's handwriting filled the margins, detailing plans for community projects, charities, and ways to help those in need. There were lists of names, people his grandfather had helped over the years, people David had never even heard of. It was as if his grandfather had been preparing for this moment all along. David's chest tightened. He had always thought of his grandfather as a quiet, reserved man. But now he realized his grandfather had been a silent force for good, helping others without seeking recognition. The treasure wasn't just money, it was a legacy. And now that legacy was in David's hands. He closed the book and stood up, his mind made up. He couldn't keep this treasure for himself. He had to honor his grandfather's wishes. But how? Where would he even begin? The task felt overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. David carefully closed the chest and began the climb back up the staircase. As he emerged from the secret door, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The cemetery was still silent, but the weight of the treasure no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a mission. He covered the door with dirt and replaced the stone, making sure no one would find it. As he walked away from the grave, he felt a spark of determination. He didn't know how, but he was going to change lives. He was going to make his grandfather proud. David spent the next few days in a daze. The treasure was safely hidden in a secure location, but the weight of it followed him everywhere. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on work. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the chest of gold and his grandfather's note, "Use it to change lives." But how? He wasn't a philanthropist or a community leader. He was just an ordinary man with an extraordinary problem. He thought about donating the money to charities, but that felt too impersonal. His grandfather had helped people directly, one by one. David knew he had to do the same. One evening, as he walked home from work, he noticed a small crowd gathered outside a crumbling building. Curious, he approached and saw a woman standing on the steps, addressing the group. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. "This shelter has been a home for so many," she said, "but without repairs, we'll have to close. We've done everything we can, but we just don't have the funds." David recognized the building. It was a homeless shelter he had passed countless times, but never paid much attention to. The woman speaking was the director, a tireless advocate for the homeless in the community. He had seen her in the local news, always fighting for those who had no one else. As he listened, something clicked. This was it. This was where he could start. He didn't know how much it would cost to repair the shelter, but he knew he had more than enough. His heart raced as he approached the woman after the crowd dispersed. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling. I, I'd like to help." The woman looked at him, surprised but grateful. "Thank you. Every little bit helps. We're trying to raise $50,000, but it's been slow going." David hesitated. He could write her a check for the full amount right now, but he didn't want to draw attention to himself. Instead, he said, "I can cover it. All of it." The woman's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That's incredible. But why? Why would you do this?" David thought about his grandfather, about the legacy he was trying to honor. "Let's just say it's what my family would have wanted." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You have no idea what this means to us. Thank you. Thank you so much." As David walked away, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a flicker of hope. He had taken the first step. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in days, he felt like he was on the right path. Word spread quickly about the anonymous donor who had saved the homeless shelter. The local newspaper ran a story, calling it a miracle for the community. David read the article with a mix of pride and anxiety. He hadn't expected the attention, but he couldn't deny the joy he felt knowing he had made a difference. Encouraged by his first success, David began to look for other ways to help. He started small, paying off a struggling family's medical bills, funding a scholarship for a promising student, and donating to a local food bank. Each act of kindness gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. But he was careful to stay anonymous, using his grandfather's methods to ensure the focus remained on the people he was helping, not on him. One day, as he was leaving the food bank after dropping off a donation, he noticed a young woman sitting on a bench outside. She was holding a notebook, scribbling furiously, her brow furrowed in concentration. Something about her caught his attention. She looked determined, almost fierce, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. David hesitated, then sat down on the bench a few feet away. "Mind if I join you?" The woman looked up, startled, but then smiled. "Sure, it's a free bench." David chuckled. "What are you working on?" She hesitated, then held up her notebook. "Plans for a community center, a place where kids can go after school, where people can find resources and support. But," she sighed, "it's just a dream right now. Funding is impossible to come by." David's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly the kind of project his grandfather would have supported. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma," she said. "And you?" "David," he replied. He paused, then added, "I think your idea is amazing. What if I told you I could help make it happen?" Emma's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" David took a deep breath. "I mean I can fund it, all of it." Emma stared at him, disbelief written all over her face. "You're serious?" David nodded. "Completely. But I want to stay anonymous. This is about the community, not me." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. This could change everything." David smiled. "Then let's get started." Over the next few weeks, David and Emma worked closely together. She was passionate and driven, with a clear vision for the community center. David admired her dedication and found himself looking forward to their meetings. For the first time in years, he felt connected to someone, like he was part of something bigger than himself. As the project took shape, David began to see the ripple effect of his actions. The community was coming together, inspired by the new center. People were volunteering, donating, and spreading the word. It was exactly what his grandfather had envisioned, a legacy of kindness and generosity that touched countless lives. But as David's confidence grew, so did his fear. He had already used a significant portion of the treasure. How long would it last? And what would happen when it was gone? The questions haunted him, but he pushed them aside. For now he was focused on the present and on the woman who had become an unexpected partner in his journey. The community center project was in full swing, and Emma's energy was infectious. She worked tirelessly, coordinating with contractors, volunteers, and local organizations. David admired her passion and dedication, and he found himself spending more and more time with her. They had become a team, united by a shared vision for the community. But as the project grew, so did the challenges. The initial budget had been stretched thin, and unexpected costs kept piling up. David had already dipped into the treasure multiple times, and he could feel the weight of it dwindling. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever, but he didn't want to let Emma or the community down. One evening, as they reviewed the latest expenses in the makeshift office they had set up at the construction site, Emma sighed and rubbed her temples. "We're running out of money," she said bluntly. "If we don't find more funding soon, we'll have to pause construction." David's stomach churned. He had been dreading this moment. "How much do we need?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with frustration and exhaustion. "At least another $100,000. And that's just to keep things moving for the next few months. I don't know where we're going to get it." David hesitated. He still had enough left in the treasure to cover the amount, but it would leave him with almost nothing. What would he do then? How would he continue his grandfather's legacy? The question swirled in his mind, but he couldn't bear to see Emma so defeated. "I'll take care of it," he said finally. Emma's eyes widened. "David, you've already done so much. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," he interrupted. "I'm offering. This project is too important to let it fail." Emma stared at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "You're incredible, you know that. But I need to know something. Why are you doing this? Why are you so invested in this project, in all of this?" David looked away, his heart pounding. He had never told anyone about the treasure or his grandfather's letter, but Emma's question stirred something in him. He wanted to trust her, to share the burden he had been carrying alone. "It's complicated," he said slowly. "But let's just say I'm trying to honor someone who believed in helping others. Someone who believed in me." Emma studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I won't push, but just know that whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. And I'm here for you, whatever you need." David felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. The next day, David transferred the funds to the project account. As he watched the numbers on his screen drop, he felt a pang of fear. What would he do when the treasure was gone? How would he continue to make a difference? But then he thought about Emma, about the community center, and about the lives they were changing. He knew it was worth it. That evening, as he walked home, he noticed a group of kids playing in the park near the construction site. They were laughing and running, their faces filled with joy. One of them waved at him, and David waved back, a smile spreading across his face. This was why he was doing it. This was his grandfather's legacy. But as he turned the corner, he noticed a man watching him from across the street. The man was dressed in a dark coat, his face partially hidden by a hat. David's heart skipped a beat. Had someone figured out his secret? Was he in danger? He quickened his pace, his mind racing. The challenges were far from over. The man in the dark coat didn't follow David that night, but the encounter left him on edge. For days, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He started taking different routes home, avoiding the construction site and keeping a low profile. But the fear lingered, gnawing at him. Meanwhile, the community center project was progressing faster than ever. The new funds had allowed them to hire more workers, and the building was starting to take shape. Emma was thrilled, and her enthusiasm was contagious. She often joked that David was her guardian angel, but he couldn't laugh along. The weight of the treasure and the fear of losing it was becoming unbearable. One afternoon, as they were reviewing blueprints in the office, Emma noticed David's distracted expression. "Hey," she said gently, "what's going on? You've been quiet all day." David hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, about the treasure, the letter, the man in the coat, but he was afraid. What if she thought he was crazy? What if she didn't believe him? "It's nothing," he said finally. "Just a lot on my mind." Emma studied him, her brow furrowed. "You know you can talk to me, right? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." David felt a surge of gratitude. Emma had become more than just a partner in the project. She was a friend, someone he trusted. But he still couldn't bring himself to share his secret. Not yet. The next day, David decided to visit the cemetery. He hadn't been back since the night he found the treasure, but he felt drawn to his grandfather's grave. As he stood there, staring at the tombstone, he whispered, "I'm trying, Grandpa. I'm really trying, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, David felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if his grandfather was there, reassuring him. But the moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps behind him. David turned, his heart pounding. It was the man in the dark coat. "David," the man said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." David's mind raced. How did this man know his name? What did he want? He took a step back, ready to run, but the man held up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said. "I'm here to help." David frowned. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out an old photograph. He handed it to David. The photo showed a younger version of his grandfather, standing with a group of people. Among them was the man in the coat. "My name is Victor," the man said. "I was your grandfather's closest friend. He told me about the treasure and about you." David's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. "What do you want?" Victor's expression softened. "Your grandfather was a good man, David. He wanted to make sure the treasure was used for good, but he also knew it could be dangerous. That's why he asked me to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were safe." David's mind was spinning. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I wanted to give you space," Victor said, "but now I think you need my help. There are people who know about the treasure, David. Dangerous people, and they're getting closer." David's heart sank. He had been so focused on helping others that he hadn't considered the risks. Now he realized he was in over his head. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together. But first you need to trust me." David nodded, but his mind was racing. He thought about Emma, about the community center, about all the lives he had touched. He couldn't let it all fall apart now. As they left the cemetery, David felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The challenges were far from over, but he wasn't alone anymore, and that gave him hope. David and Victor worked quickly. Together, they devised a plan to protect the remaining treasure and ensure the community center project could be completed without drawing unwanted attention. Victor's connections and experience proved invaluable, and for the first time in weeks, David felt a sense of relief. He wasn't alone anymore. But there was still one person he needed to trust with the truth: Emma. One evening after the construction crew had left for the day, David asked Emma to stay behind. They sat on the steps of the nearly finished community center, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the building. "There's something I need to tell you," David began, his voice shaky. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Emma looked at him, her expression calm but curious. "Okay, I'm listening." David took a deep breath and told her everything, about the letter, the treasure, the secret door, and the risks they now faced. As he spoke, he watched her face carefully, waiting for disbelief or anger. But instead, she listened quietly. her eyes never leaving his. When he finished, Emma was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. "I always knew there was something special about you," she said, "but I never imagined it was something like this." David blinked, surprised. "You're not upset?" Emma shook her head. "Upset? David, you've done something incredible. You've taken this gift and used it to help so many people. That's not something to be upset about. That's something to be proud of." David felt a wave of emotion. For the first time, he realized that he was proud. Proud of what he had accomplished. Proud of the lives he had touched. And proud to be carrying on his grandfather's legacy. "Thank you," he said softly, "for understanding. For everything." Emma reached over and took his hand. "We're in this together, remember? Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a team." With Emma and Victor by his side, David felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. The community center was completed a few weeks later, and the grand opening was a celebration for the entire town. People from all walks of life came together, united by the hope and opportunity the center represented. As David stood on the stage looking out at the crowd, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had started this journey alone, driven by a sense of duty to his grandfather. But along the way, he had found something even more valuable: a purpose, a community, and a love he hadn't expected. When it was his turn to speak, David stepped up to the microphone. "This center isn't just a building," he said. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives." The crowd erupted into applause, but David's eyes were on Emma. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. In that moment, he knew he had found his place in the world. As the celebration continued, Victor approached David and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "You've done more than he ever could have imagined." David nodded, his heart full. "Thank you, Victor, for everything." Victor smiled. "The treasure may be gone, but the legacy lives on, and that's what matters." David looked around at the bustling community center, at the people laughing and talking, at the children playing in the new courtyard. He realized that Victor was right. The treasure had been a means to an end, but the real gift was the impact it had created, in the person it had helped him become. As the sun set, casting a golden light over the center, David felt a sense of peace. He had started this journey by digging up his grandfather's grave, but he had ended it by building something that would last for generations. And in doing so, he had found not only his purpose, but also his happiness.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.